Feeling very sad. A little bitter. You put 2 years of preparation into it, and you get crushed by a sled, and I've got something like a broken rib, or I'm not sure, but really it's debilitating, so it's hard to leave.
Robert James Bob McKerrow, born on the 21st of March 1948, is a native of New Zealand. He's a humanitarian, mountaineer, polar traveler, writer and poet. He currently works as the head of delegation for the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies in Sri Lanka. Since the Indian Ocean tsunami struck on the 26th December 2004, McKerrow has worked in India, Sri Lanka, Maldives and Indonesia, coordinating Red Cross programs for people affected by the tsunami. McKerrow was a leading middle-distance runner from the age of 13, and he broke the Ortega provincial record for under 17 and later under 19, 880 yards with a time of 1 minute 57.8 seconds. At the age of 19, McKerrow was selected to be a member of the New Zealand mountaineering expedition to Peru. The expedition spent 4 months climbing and exploring. Bob joined the Red Cross in the 1970s and have worked in Asia, Africa and Europe. A career spanning over 40 years, we sat down with Big Bob to share some moments and experience. Let's go back into the old days, into the 1970s. What actually made you pretty much to be a humanitarian? What motivated you?
I can remember at the age of 8 volunteering to collect used clothing for Red Cross. There was the crisis in Hungary, and I remember seeing photographs of children fleeing across the border into Austria. I felt, can I do something? And I also had a mother who was born deaf, and I saw how society discriminated against her, and I didn't like that. I defended her on many occasions when people called her dumb, when I knew she was the most intelligent woman in my life. So I think that had a factor in me choosing to work in the humanitarian field.
So let me get a good understanding of what your youth was like. What motivated you in terms of day-to-day life as a person, a young adult or a youth?
I was brought up in a working class neighbourhood. We all had basic clothing, basic food, sport. Rugby and playing in the local forest was sort of our major pastime. So we had a tough life, and snowed a lot. We lived in a hill suburb in a southern city in New Zealand. So we were brought up tough, and I think that equipped me for later life. I thought nothing of walking 3 hours to visit a relative and then walk 3 hours home. So I value that upbringing.
So in the 1970s, you were motivated by doing something useful in your life. And how did it all start? How did you join the Red Cross?
Well, it really started in 1968. When I was 19, I went to South America on a New Zealand mountaineering expedition. And I saw incredible poverty in the slums of Lima, the capital. And when I went into the mountains, I just saw how poor the Quechua Indians were. So I spent a little bit of time in Lima working with a young woman who was working in the slums with really poor people. Then I drifted off to Antarctica for 13 months, and I thought maybe I should do something about the poverty that I saw in South America. And that's how I got into Red Cross.
So, in terms of your first mission, um, tell me, how was it like, in the 1970s? Not much of, what can I say, facilities in that time. So, going on a mission from your country to another country, how was it like?
Oh, fascinating. I remember arriving in Singapore, 71, and then flying into Saigon, the then capital of South Vietnam. Left a big impression on me. We were working with tribal people, the Montagnards, who really had a very basic subsistence way of life and were discriminated against by the lowland people. So the work was right in front of us. We didn't have to look for work. We were dealing with thousands of people that were living on the poverty line.
So, Bob, in terms of these people in your first mission in the 1970s, most of them are not exactly exposed to Western nationals in those areas. So, was it tough? Was it easy for you to go into these communities and work?
I didn't think in terms, is it easy or is it hard? I mean, whatever we do in life is we have to build relationships with people. You have to find something in common. The people I worked with were tribal hill people, known as Montagnards. The women were topless, the men would walk around in a loincloth. They would kill animals with a blowpipe with a poison dart in it. So it was a culture locked in a time warp, and just doing something like working with them to build a well that was cleaner than the one they had, and you saw children getting healthier. You'd see a whole community getting healthier, and within 6 months the elders would say, we don't have sickness anymore. So they thought we had some magical powers. So it was quite a remarkable experience.
One thing that I mean, for anyone who is watching to understand, what are the challenges you all faced at those times whenever you went into these villages and trying to pretty much help people?
It wasn't as simple as that. Vietnam, it was a war going on. Basically America and its allies against the North Vietnamese, Chinese, USSR. So people were on the move. The North Vietnamese they needed porters to carry supplies down the Ho Chi Minh trails. So a lot of the men were abducted and put on the Ho Chi Minh Trail as porters. The elderly people and the young children were homeless. So what we would do, we would get permission from the government to get, say, 100 hectares of land, and every day there'd be 200 or 300 people coming out of the hill. These were people on the move, internally displaced people, and what we would do, we would put them on land on day one. On day two, we would get them cutting bamboo for their houses. Day three, they'd have their house almost complete. Day four, they were into livelihoods, and day five, they had instant trees growing on their plot of land. And the way we did it was, though we always did an assessment of what skills the people had. Blacksmith, we had lots of metal. We would get them working, making tools for gardening. If the women were good at sewing, we would start sewing cooperatives. But a week after these people arriving out in the mountains, they would have a house made out of bamboo. They'd have banana trees that had been transplanted there. They'd have vegetable gardens growing, and they'd be working away. So today we have so much bureaucracy. There'd be a month of planning before you could even consider putting someone on the land.
So in terms of what you're saying is it's a very simpler mechanism of helping people in times when they need help. So what do you feel like from there onwards, what are the challenges that you faced when you move on to another region or another part of the world?
When I was leaving Vietnam, the war had broken out between India and Pakistan over East Pakistan. And in January 1972, the IFRC were asking national societies to send socio-medical teams in. So I was one of 20 teams. At the age of 23, I was made leader of a New Zealand Red Cross medical team, doctor, nurses, and I have the expertise in logistics. So flew into Dhaka on a New Zealand Air Force Hercules, no passport control, stamped my own passport. Bangladesh had just become independent. Was told that there were millions of people crossing the border in northern India, and I was to get up there, provide food and provide medical care. There were 5 of us. It took us a week to get there because every bridge had been blown by the retreating army. So we got up to the north of Bangladesh, millions of people streaming across the border, starving. Had no trucks. I saw a convoy of 20 trucks coming down the road from India on its way to Dhaka, UN signs on it. And I knew those trucks could never get to Dhaka, they'd be hijacked. So I commandeered the truck and gave them a note, let the UN know that I'm going to be borrowing trucks for a while, and found the Indian Red Cross had a huge warehouse across the border with thousands of tons of food. So we set up a supply chain with the Indian Red Cross, bringing food across the border. We had our doctors and nurses working with Bangladeshi doctors and nurses, and just 5 New Zealanders with 1 Land Rover had a huge impact. We had a huge impact, and we set up a branch of the Bangladesh Red Cross. I put on all the notice boards on the villages, we need to set up a branch, and Joe Nabali turned up. He became the chairman. He was the local advocate, and we got a branch going. So mobilising the power of humanity. It may be a slogan today, but that was 72. We actually did it.
So from Asia, you moved to Africa, go into a completely different type of, what can I say, a world at that time. Poverty, diseases and things like that just spewing up in parts of Africa. So how was your mission like at that time?
Yeah, I had 2 assignments in Ethiopia, 74 and again in 78, 79. Difficult, but exceptionally hospitable and competent people to work with. And so we achieved a lot with the Ethiopian Red Cross. I mean, in 78, 79, there was a Marxist-Leninist government that were very, very strict. Foreign organisations weren't allowed to travel. Fortunately, they let me travel. I was one of the few foreigners permitted to travel. And we went into the highlands, which were at over 12,000 feet, and people were dying everywhere. And I can remember traveling with a friend from the Ethiopian Red Cross, and in the morning, the women would put children who had died during the night outside our tent. The only thing we could say was, we're grieving with you, we understand what you're doing, but we don't have food with us now. We've got ships on the way, they'll be arriving in a few days' time, but it's going to take us weeks to get food to you. So we could give hope, but not immediate hope. And the frustrating thing was walking for 12, 13 days and actually having food in my backpack and seeing people dying of starvation. Not easy, but I had to keep myself alive and my friend from the Ethiopian Red Cross alive. And we had to do that assessment, and we made a movie called The Hungry Highlands. The government wouldn't let us call it, wouldn't let us say starving to death. They wanted something more subtle, because I said to the president of the country, I said, if you don't get this documentary on global TV, you're not going to get money for Ethiopia. So here I am battling with a president who was a strong Marxist-Leninist who had a reputation for eliminating anyone that opposed him. So that humanitarian diplomacy in those days was not easy, but you had to present the situation in such a way that it was a win-win, a win for them and a win for us by having access to the people and getting food into them.
So from Africa, you once again come back to Asia, and you go to Afghanistan, Pakistan, and these areas, and which I believe that it pretty much captures your heart, your imagination, especially in Afghanistan. How was it like?
Yeah, I've always loved mountains. I've always loved poetry. I've written a book on poetry, and I love flowers. I love growing roses. And in Afghanistan, poetry is a way of life. People love their flower gardens, and the mountains are all around you. So it was a love affair, in a way, with the people, the landscape, but certainly not a love affair with conflict or the poverty I saw.
So 43 years of serving humanity, how do you feel in terms of these people you have met and the things you have done? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Helping your neighbour was something that didn't start for me when I joined the Red Cross. It started I like to think, as a child at kindergarten. We're brought up in a family and in a society where helping each other was a way of life. If someone in your community had nothing, you'd give it to them. If your friend didn't have a jacket and it was snowing, you'd find a jacket and give it to them. So it's no sort of, my life sort of didn't start with Red Cross and is ending with Red Cross. I think that the Good Samaritan spirit prevails in all countries in the world and all communities, and I hope I can continue working for people in some way, maybe coaching rugby or cricket or something.
Certainly, we are very much aware of your love with sports and how you've been very passionate about cricket, very passionate about rugby. That is in your personal life. So the question for me is, you go all around the world helping people and making sure that they are well-to-do, giving them humanitarian assistance. How does that affect your personal life?
It can be hard to some extent because you don't have roots. You know, I proudly say I'm a New Zealander. Every weekend I watch rugby. But you feel a little bit dislocated from your own people, your own culture and the land. And that's why I'm looking forward to going back. It's been a hard life. I wrote to someone the other day, I said, I'm bruised, I'm battered, I'm tired, but I feel a real sense of fulfillment.
Again, going back a little bit in time, the 1970s, when you started as a humanitarian, and even today you're working and running a major project here in Sri Lanka in order to provide houses for the people who are returning from the 30-year-old conflict. So how was it like in the 1970s, and then comparing it to today's work? What has changed?
I look at the last 40 years like the pendulum in a clock. In 1970 or 71, the pendulum was here. It was under accountability. Today, the pendulum is swung and we're into an era of aid over accountability. In the 70s, we were very much self-motivated. We regulated ourselves. At the end of the day, we check with our co-workers, how did we do today? And we give critical feedback to each other. We would listen to the communities we were serving. We often lived in the villages. We didn't live in 5-star or even 3-star hotels. We lived many weeks in villages at a time. So I felt that the people receiving our help regulated us to some extent. If we didn't do something well, they would tell us because we were close to the people. But what happened in the 80s, some international organisations got bad press for big houses with swimming pools, and money seemed to be going towards their own benefit. So the auditors and accountants started stalking the corridors of our organisations, and we were sending people to the field to check and double check and monitor. You almost felt that you were untrustworthy, and yet I was still the same person from the 70s. Why is everyone watching so closely? And this pendulum kept swinging. We need policies, we need guidelines, but I was quoted in 2000 in the World Disaster Report. I said, international organisations are planning themselves to death. The 70s, minimalistic planning. The 80s, it increased a little bit more. But in the last 20 years, we've just seen an overreaction to strategies, to policy, jingoism, jargon. And are we working better? Yes, we still deliver a very professional service to the people, but much more bureaucratic, much more bureaucratic.
Someone can argue saying that you need those because to make sure that the funding or the dollars that comes into these kinds of work has to be accounted for. So you need to have your policies, you need to have your systems, and you need to have your log frames and whatnot. So what do you think, in your opinion, how do we balance that?
Well, if I go back to the 70s, I selected people who had a reputation for honesty, integrity, and hard work. I made sure that I got the best people that were available. And I like to think that I was of a high integrity myself. And you built up you built up a relationship of trust with your team, with the village people you worked with, and we operated on trust and team accountability. And so there were accountability mechanisms. Yes, we would have accountants coming from, say, the New Zealand Red Cross every year to check the books and to see, but we didn't write reports in those days. We had a wonderful Secretary General of the New Zealand Red Cross, Commander Ashdown, said, don't waste your time writing reports. When you go in the village, take this Super 8 camera, okay? I'd have a Super 8 camera. I'd film the doctors working, the nurses working, Mac and Ron working with lepers, helping them setting up rice paddies. And we would send them back to New Zealand, and he would make copies of them, sending out to the branches. And they loved these, Super 8 movies, and the money rolled in. So I started off accountable, yes, because people could see the school they were sponsoring, they could see the children that we were running a hygiene promotion program. So in a way, I think that was brilliant accountability, having to be on camera virtually every second day to show your work. Much better, than writing another log frame, another long-winded report that sits on a shelf and just gathers dust.
So Bob, how do you feel about the last decade or so?
I feel very proud of what we in the Red Cross, Red Crescent have achieved. If we go back just a decade, the Gujarat earthquake in 2001, the tsunami in 2004, Pakistan earthquake in 2005, West Sumatra earthquake 2008, just one earthquake after the other, one disaster after the other. For example, the Red Cross will hopefully in the next year complete 20,000 houses in Sri Lanka. That's a lot of houses. In Indonesia, we constructed 40,000 houses. In Pakistan, we worked with over 100,000 families in the mountains that were virtually freezing to death during the winter. I have a real sense of we as an organisation have achieved a lot. And, I used to read my children a book called Bob the Builder. If someone says, what would you like to call yourself? I'd like to maybe be called Bob the Rebuilder.
If you sum it up, the whole 43 years that you've been working, what have you learnt?
What have I learnt? I think the parable of the Good Samaritan is alive and well. There's nothing scientific about what we're doing unless you're building a bridge or something complex. It is just helping one another. It's giving. And today we talk about beneficiary communication. Big deal. I think working for the New Zealand Red Cross in Bangladesh, Vietnam, Fiji, we got to know the people we were working with. We lived in the villages. We played sport with them in the weekends. We would go to the funerals and the weddings. And today when people remind me, are you doing beneficiary communication? I think, oh my God, I'm back to kindergarten again.
Let's say there is someone who's watching this who's pretty much is starting the Red Cross life. This is a new era. This is new mechanisms and new policies and things like that. This is a new Red Cross which we are seeing in today's format. What would the advice be from a 43-year-old Red Cross humanitarian?
Don't be afraid to make decisions. Don't feel you have to go to the next layer, the next level, and ad infinitum. Is that I tell my staff is that if you've got 2,000 people that need food, you've got money in your pocket, look up and pretend that you are in a court of inquiry and there's an old judge and he or she says to you, young man, young woman, did you make that decision in the interest of the most vulnerable? And if you answer yes, then you're making the right decision and I'll back you 100%. But unfortunately, due to the pendulum of over-accountability still swinging skywards, people are afraid to take decisions. And that's why I think we're not as effective as we could be.
Bob, once again, I would like to congratulate you for the 43 years that you have served for the Red Cross and wish you very best for the next however years that you come. I'm pretty sure that you will once again pop up in one of the islands or one of the countries, once again serving the Red Cross, because I mean, obviously no one leaves the Red Cross, they're still there. It's just that one of the chapters is coming to an end. Congratulations and thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Mahesh.